Mortise and Tenon joinery. Stick around for the video and I'll show you how I improve my accuracy and my efficiency to make sure that I don't make mistakes. And I'm going to be using the split top Rubo bench that I'm in the middle of constructing so that I can show you on real pieces, specifically the legs and the rails. Let's just jump right into it and get at it. Let's begin by talking about some of the tools that I use in order to lay out the joinery. You're going to need some way to measure, okay? And I use a tape measure. This one's a 25-foot one. I prefer to use a 10 or a 16-foot tape because it's lighter weight and sometimes it's easier to handle. The important thing is though, whatever tape measure you begin with, stick with the same one from start to finish because there's going to be inevitable variations in different tape measures and you're going to want all of your joinery to be consistent. You're probably going to want a high quality ruler of some kind. It's going to allow you to get down to some nice fine increments if you actually need that kind of accuracy. It depends on the project. I've got in my hand here a 12-inch 4R ruler, and what that means is there's 4 different increments on it. It has 8ths, 16ths, 32nds, and 64ths. So on the one side here, you've got the 8ths and the 16ths, and then on the other side you've got the 32nds and the 64ths of an inch increments. You're also going to want some way to mark on your workpiece, and I mainly use 2 things. One would be a mechanical pencil, and this one is just a Bic 0.7 millimeter mechanical pencil. You can get some that are smaller diameter leads or smaller thickness leads at 0.5 of a millimeter. I find they break too easy, but the 0.7 millimeter leads I find are durable enough for laying out this kind of a thing. The other thing that's really useful in marking out your joinery is a marking knife, and this is just a basic one that I got from Lee Valley here in Canada, and it has dual bevels on it. So it's got a bevel here and a bevel there, so you can put it on either one side of a ruler or on the other side of a ruler as you flip it to one side or the other, always putting the flat back against the ruler or the square when you're using it. And that gives you a very, very precise knife line on your joinery. The next item that I keep around for laying out the joinery is marking gauges. I actually only used to have one, but when I started to lay out dovetails about 1 or 2 years ago, I learned that if you have 2 of them, you can leave measurements set on one and a different set of measurements on another. The way these work is there's a beam with a scale on the beam, and you can change where the, I'll call it the fence, actually rides on that beam to whatever measurement you want for your project. One of the first measurements I'm going to do in this project is the 1-inch tenons on the ends of the legs. So we'll set it to 1 inch, reference the fence right up against the edge of the leg, and we'll mark all 4 sides with the same setting so that it's very consistent. And we'll do that on all 4 legs with the same setting so they're all identical. The other thing you're going to want to use is a square, and I like to use an engineer's square because they're very precise. You can use a high quality, maybe like PEX or Starrett square if you have one, but just some of these engineering squares are great. Now I like to have one that will span all the way across the workpiece from one side to the other. Those are the main tools that I use. I've got a couple other rulers and squares around, but you can get by with just a few tools like this, and they're not really all that expensive either. The first bit of marking we're going to do is we're going to mark off the shoulders of the tenons on the tops of all of the legs. And with this ruler that I have, it actually has little increments that are indents on the ruler. So I'm actually going to put the cutter head right in the 1-inch mark and then slide the fence right up to it. So that's about as precise as I can ever get. If you've got other tips on how to do this, more precisely than that, let me know. But I find this works really, really well in order to do this. Now, I will point out that as I'm using the marking gauge, I'm keeping most of the pressure with this index finger against the fence in this little curved area. And on the far side or the trailing edge, as I'm dragging it towards me, and I'm using my thumb to pull the marking gauge across the piece and slowly kind of rotating or putting gentle pressure on that cutter head so that it can actually slice or sever those fibers along the shoulder line. So that's one way that you can get a nice crisp line, is just the way that you're holding your marking gauge and where you're actually applying the pressure. and that's all completed all around that end. So we'll do the other side. A little trickier sometimes when you're doing a wider run. Very easy to do a short run like I just showed you, using your thumb to pull the marking gauge across that short distance. But when you've got a wider run, like the actual face of the rail, you're going to have to pull it all the way along. And I like to kind of rotate my hand so that that index finger keeps pressure against that trailing edge. And I'm watching right in this area to make sure that my workpiece is right up against the fence on the marking gauge and that no gaps develop in there. And that's why you want to actually put just gentle light pressure on the marking gauge to make sure that you establish a line for your cutter to follow very lightly, and then you go again very, very lightly, and keeping that pressure up against the end of your workpiece so that you get a nice, crisp, uniform line that's equidistant on this end as well as on this end. This leg has some awesome grain on it. This one's going to go right on the front of the bench where I see it all the time because I really love this one piece of wood that went into this leg. So in order to not make mistakes, I like to use the mechanical pencil and just darken those marking gauge lines. If you use your finger against the end of the workpiece, get the tip right in the line, very easy to follow that marking gauge line that you've put onto the workpiece. And we know we're going to remove all of this, so we might as well just darken it out so we know that's all going to be waste. And similarly on the end here, I did put the lines, so super easy for your pencil to follow that set of pencil lines you stuck on, or sorry, the marking gauge lines that you've stuck on there. So that's what we'll keep, and then all of this will be gone as waste. Easy peasy. Lemon squeezy. One thing that I also find quite helpful is if I just label the left, right, and the fronts and the backs of all the different pieces for legs, especially when the mortises are going to be cut in very specific places on all of them, and I don't like to make a mistake. The Benchcrafted plans actually have them labeled this way, and I just think that putting some painter's tape on here, labeling the front, left, back, and right is another way to just decrease your chances of making a mistake in the long run with laying all this out. So 5 3/8 up from the bottom, so 1 2 3/8 right here, and we'll mark that across, and 3.5 inches right there. Slide the square up and make a nice scribe mark. And then a couple marking gauges, very handy to have 2 of them. You can go faster and just keep your accuracy right how it needs to be when you've got a pair of these. You can actually get a mortise marking gauge that has 2 cutter heads on it that you can set for both of these at the same time. And the way they tend to work is you flip it. There's 2 beams that come out at the end, and you can actually use one beam, flip it over 180 degrees, and use the other beam, and then you don't have to have 2 separate ones. And they're handy as well. Then you're not picking up and putting down the different marking gauges. Okay, so that has these mortises marked out. We're ready to be cut. All right, so as you can see, laying out mortise and tenon joinery really isn't rocket science. You just got to take your time and make sure you do it right the first time so you don't make any mistakes. Be sure to leave me a comment down below. Let me know if you picked up any tips on laying out your joinery a little bit more accurately. And give me a thumbs up if you liked the video. It'll really help me out a lot. So until next time, go build something beautiful.